Welcome back to Two Keto Dudes. This is Carl Franklin from Connecticut in the United States. And in February 2016, I put myself on a ketogenic diet to take control of my metabolism. In just 2.5 months, I managed to reverse all my markers of type 2 diabetes with diet alone. As of now, I'm 80 pounds lighter with no signs of diabetes or heart disease.
Hi, I'm Richard Morris in Canberra, Australia. I've been on a ketogenic diet since April of 2014. When I started, I was very sick with complications from type 2 diabetes. Within 6 months of starting a ketogenic diet, all of my biomarkers of disease had disappeared. I've lost about 100 pounds and I've completely turned my health around.
And this show is a document of my progress through ketosis and Richard's experience thriving for years in ketosis.
Oh, yeah.
And hopefully that might help a few people who are curious about this kind of dietary hacking.
Yeah, we're not doctors. We don't want to give anyone any medical advice, but we are keen to share our own experiences. We're actually both software developers, so we're not afraid of a little technical detail, are we, Carl?
Nah.
We've done some research into our own deranged metabolisms and the science behind that. We hope to share some of that research. Where possible, we intend to put links in the show notes to cite research supporting any claims that we make.
You'll probably work out pretty quickly that we're both foodies.
Yeah, we sure are.
We love to cook and we love to eat. And every episode, we both share a keto recipe that cannot be ignored.
Cannot.
All right, so let's start podcast number 101, Zoe Rocks, Part 1.
We're justified and we don't need no alibi.
So, Richard, do we have any apologies or corrections from last week's show?
That was Keto Centurions. That was our 100th show. And we actually do have a correction, or actually somebody who's written in and said, I just listened to Keto Centurions episode 100. Congratulations on that milestone. And one brief exchange between you both caught my attention. Carl said that he'd read the ingredients of a popular variety of snack almonds. I think it was Blue Diamond. And so Jeff goes on, he says, he noted that one of the ingredients was hydrolyzed vegetable protein, and you both wondered aloud why. Well, plant protein is quite high in glutamic acid, one of the 20 amino acids that are protein's building blocks. What happens when you hydrolyze plant protein? You end up with the monosodium salt of glutamic acid, otherwise known as monosodium glutamate. And there's your answer.
Yeah, glutamines.
We all love umami, but we have been warned away from that devil MSG. Where food producers use the phrase hydrolyzed vegetable or plant protein, it sounds a lot less evil. So there you go. That's why.
Okay. I was more concerned about, what was it, dextrose or maltodextrose or something that was in there.
Yeah.
Yeah, they had sugared them. Oh, well.
Sneaky buggers.
Well, that's good to know. So let's revisit what a ketogenic diet is.
Sure.
It's any diet that puts you in a state of ketosis, meaning you're burning fat for energy and generating ketones for brain fuel and muscle fuel and all that other stuff. And you can do that by lowering your carbohydrates to 20 grams or less per day.
Right.
And get those carbohydrates from green leafy vegetables and a few nuts.
Yeah.
Eggs, that kind of thing. And protein is moderate on a ketogenic diet. That means not too much, not too little, about 1 to 1.5 grams of protein for every kilogram of lean body mass.
Right.
And then all your energy you want to get from fat.
Wonderful.
Yeah. So how was your week, Richard?
It was actually pretty awesome. I had a major milestone this week, as you probably know. I went under 100 kilograms.
Right.
Now, it was only temporary, but we've had a heat wave here for 5 days, and it's been over 40 degrees Celsius, and I've been out riding in the sun, in the heat, and so I get quite dehydrated, and so that was dehydrated weight. My real weight's probably about 1 or 1.6 kilos-ish, but it certainly, it means I've lost almost 50 kilograms for my highest weight.
That's awesome, man. Congratulations.
Thank you. And the interesting thing is that my ketones are out the wazoo. Normally, as you probably know, my ketones are normally low. Between 0.2 and 0.8 is my physiological range. And I really have to fast for 3 days and then do 2 hours of exercise to get above 1.
Yeah.
Well, normally your ketones are lowest when you first wake up in the morning. And mine, I mean, they're never over 0.4 when I first wake up in the morning. Except one exception was when we were in Breckenridge at altitude.
Yeah.
I saw unusually high ketones. But so the interesting thing is, for the past couple of weeks, I've been supplementing an amino acid called glycine. I'm doing an experiment to see if I'm conditionally deficient in it. I eat a lot of connective tissue and skin, pork belly. And so I shouldn't be deficient. I should be getting adequate supplies from diet. But I wanted to see if I supplement, do I see a change in my glucose dynamics? And boy, did I. My ketones this morning were 1.9.
Wow.
I know,
now,
right?
Did you make any other changes to your diet or lifestyle, like not eating after a certain time or giving up aspartame or sucralose or whatever? Any other things?
So I've been using this glycine. Glycine is actually a sweet amino acid. It's colorless, so it's a white crystal, and it's really quite sweet. It's not as sweet as sugar, but it got its name originally from tasting sweet, hence the name. So I've been using it as a sweetener in my coffee in the morning. You know, I replace sucralose in my coffee with glycine, a little half a teaspoon of glycine. But I'm not replacing sucralose in green tea that I drink of an evening. So I'm not removing sucralose from my diet.
I see.
I'm just adding glycine to see if I was conditionally deficient.
That's interesting.
The other possible confound is that it's been hot and I've been doing some cycling. So, you know, I mean, those are things that you have to take into account.
And you've also been fasting a little bit more normally than you used to. You've been fasting every Monday and Tuesday for a couple of months now?
Ever since I got back from America in October. So, but I mean, the changes in my ketones have only been in the past week or so. And the changes in my weight has dropped significantly in that time. Also, I'm eating less. Now, you might want to say, okay, well, you're eating less, you're doing more exercise, so it's obvious that you lose weight because, you know, calories in, calories out. But the simple fact of it is that if my ketones are up that high, then my insulin is low. And I've been testing I test my blood pressure all the time because I used to be hypertensive. I'm no longer hypertensive, but ever since this intervention, my systolic and diastolic have been trending 10 points lower each.
Great.
So you know, that indicates that that it's quite possible that I've actually broken through an insulin plateau more so than a weight plateau, and then everything else flows on from that. But I'm going to do my quarterly blood test on Monday. We were recording on Saturday, so I should know in the next couple of days what my fasting insulin is. And as we know, that's been stubbornly high for almost 3 years, no matter what I do.
Oh, great.
So it's going to be interesting. We should be able to see if insulin is the underlying factor that's causing this, and then I'll be able to turn off or turn on the glycine supplementation and see if I can perturb my insulin results. So there you go. That's my week. I've had a major plateau break. I've also getting lots of ketones, and there's also one extra thing that I want to mention. This part of the show, there's a Sydney Keto meetup coming on the 28th of January, and you can see more information in the ketogenic forums on that. So go to the ketogenic forums and look up Sydney Keto, and you'll find details of that meetup.
That's great.
So that's my news for this week. How about yours, Carl?
Oh, okay. Well, I am in London. I've been here for, not New London, London, England. Yeah. Been here for a conference all week. I got here last Saturday. This is the next Saturday, so I'm flying home tonight. But basically what I did was, before I got on the plane last Saturday, I stopped at Michael Jordan's steakhouse in the Mohegan Sun Casino.
Nice. And
they have this double lamb chop. So it's a lamb chop with 2 bones, so it's double thick, so it's a couple of inches thick. And then there's 2 of them on the plate, and it comes on with some chimichurri and some of that. And I just asked for a bunch of melted butter on the side. And that's all I got. I didn't get any sides. I didn't get any salads or whatever. And I just ate that and literally drank all the butter. Just wanted to get as much fat. And that was my only meal that day. So then I went right to the plane and I fasted for 2 days. So I got here, I fasted another day, day and a half. And then the first meal I ate, was like in the afternoon. And it was just great. I just felt awesome. Felt like I've had a superpower all week,
Yeah, nice.
And so I found this other restaurant here right near Buckingham Palace, which is where my hotel is.
Mm-hmm.
So right down the street is this restaurant called the Stoke House.
Okay.
And you know it's a keto-friendly place when they ask if they can bring you some olives instead of bread. Like, they didn't even say, do you want bread? They just said, would you like some olives?
Nice.
Why, yes, I would. Thank you.
Well, thank you.
And it's all slow-roasted meats. They have a lamb belly.
Mm-hmm.
You know,
yeah.
it's wonderful. It's basically lamb breast, but think of a pork belly. It's got that much fat on it.
Right.
You know. And they also have a slow-roasted beef rib, short rib.
Yeah.
And it's just the meat. Doesn't come with any bones. And they also have rump roast, which has a nice fat cap on it.
Nice.
And you can get a platter for two that contains those 3 meats plus chicken and a bunch of sauces. And you can get like salsa verde or chimichurri. So... they have a few sides that have, potatoes and that kind of stuff, but I was able to get a spicy coleslaw on the side that had no sugar. Like, I was just surprised at how awesomely ketogenic friendly this place was.
Nice.
Yeah. So I ended up eating there every night.
I love lamb breast. We once went to our butcher and said, tell us what meat cut you think is the best one that nobody knows about. And he said lamb breast. So we got some of that. We took it home. We looked up on the web for some recipes for it. Oh, it's outstanding. It really is delicious.
It's amazing. So I had a great week, and still people are coming up to me and thanking me and you for quote unquote saving their life. The keto thing is really spreading around, and now people who noticed last year but weren't ready to commit have done it and have lost the typical 40, 50 pounds and lowered their blood sugar to safe levels. And
it's incredible.
Just,
isn't it?
one person after another is coming up and saying that. So I had a good week.
That sounds awesome. Oh, you're at a computer conference as well. So, most of the food there is likely carbs.
Yeah. There were things I could pick around, but I really didn't eat anything at the conference. Yeah. Well, Richard, I feel like giving away a coffee mug. Do you?
Yeah, some loot. Let's do it.
All right. And every show, we like to give away a coffee mug or some other piece of swag to a lucky member picked at random of the 2 Keto Dudes fan club. And you can join just by going to fanclub.2keto.com, answering a few questions, and you're already in the running.
Nice.
So we just picked a name at random, and it is none other than Glenn Patricio.
Congratulations, Glenn.
Yes. Congratulations, Glenn. We'll be sending you a coffee mug that says "Keep Calm and Keto On" with our mugs on it.
Yeah. And if you don't want to wait to win a mug, you can't wait to win the competition, you can always buy one at gear.2keto.com. Or you pick yourself up a T-shirt while you're there.
Absolutely.
Or a onesie, apparently.
Or a onesie. Well, that brings us to...
Oh, I love it.
Somebody came up to me while I was doing .NET Rocks, a live panel discussion.
Right.
And came up to me and said, man, I'm waiting for you to yell, mail!
Well, at least he wasn't looking for recipes at a .NET Rocks presentation.
Yeah,
that would have been weird.
And they probably wouldn't have been all that great. Well, anyway.
I'm going to go first.
Sure.
Okay, so this mail comes from the Ketogenic Forum, and this is from Bob, who says, interesting follow-up with my primary care. So he says, today I had my follow-up with my primary care physician. As an aside, the VA here at Fayetteville, North Carolina has improved tremendously, so I give applause to them here. Smooth running machine. Thanks, guys. So Bob says, the nurse does a double take at the record. She looks at me, she looks at the page on her left, she looks at the page on her right, looks at me again, clears the throat, and has the biggest smile on her face as she says, it says here in August you had an A1C of 11.8%, and this test last week shows it's 5.8%. How? And that how was incorporated in with a bunch of stuttering and babbling for what felt like it was taking her forever to get out. It must have been about 3 or 4 seconds, really. She almost looked like she was going to get up and dance. She said it was remarkable. She'd never seen anything like it. She double-checked the records again to be sure they were correct. But then when she looked at my weight, she was amazed. She was comparing it to the reading in September, which was 245 pounds, and she says, wow, "You've lost 40 pounds in 4 months." And I said, "No, it was 40 pounds in 2 weeks." With a much bigger smile than that. Well, I had her attention. She said she had to know, how is it possible to do this? So I didn't break it gently, since she was asking me for it, so I hit her with both barrels. I replaced all my carbs with fat. I try to eat as close to 0 carbs as possible. Her jaw dropped. Maybe I hit her a little too hard. After a moment, she asked if it was difficult, and I admitted the hardest part was giving up the addiction to carbs, which she admitted is her problem as well. She says that she's got to have her pizza. So I began to mention the foods that I now eat: steak, eggs, bacon, my 500-calorie coffee. My visit was no longer about my diabetes. It was about introducing her to keto, and I was fine with that. She was slightly overweight, not nearly to the extent that I was, but was just this side of noticeable. But not so much that I would say she was fat, more like normal with a little extra. And she was eating up all the information. She had more patients to tend to, but I could tell she wanted more. She kept stalling and asking more. So I gave her Dr. Fung's name, a quick summary of the obesity code, and the address to this forum, this ketogenic forum. Hopefully she comes here and reclaims control of her sugar-dominated health.
Wow.
He then goes on to say that his doctor comes in to talk to him, and that was a totally different experience.
Yeah.
So the doctor looked over everything and said, "Okay, keep taking your BP meds, your statins, and the metformin." I told him I haven't been taking it since mid-November. He said, "Okay, just don't discontinue them, as your blood sugar will spike really high, and that could harm you." I got really serious looking, so he would pay attention this time, as I told him the how and the why I discontinued it on my own, which prompted me to ask about the benefits of continuing it anyway for other reasons, such as, if I take my metformin, will I reverse insulin resistance? And that I had never been taking statins ever. That was news to me that I was supposed to be taking those. This got his attention, caused him to open my records and look again, make sure he was looking at the right Johnson, and said, "Oh, I see. Very good job on lowering your A1C. You must be eating much healthier and exercising a lot now." So I leveled with him because I needed him to understand. I wanted to know if taking metformin could help with my insulin resistance. He refused to talk about it, said I needed to talk with my endocrinologist about that, and that I should just continue taking my meds to prevent a sugar spike.
That's crazy.
It's incredible. So anyway, Bob says, "Look, I stood up, I shook his hand and said, 'Thank you, Doc.' It was at the most an underwhelming experience. I was prepared for some confrontation of some kind, but instead I was just received with meh. At least the nurse got some interesting information to help her out. That by itself makes the entire day worth it."
Wow. Well done.
Yeah, well done. Well,
done.
hopefully, I mean, if the nurse has come to join the forum or is listening to the podcast, welcome. We're glad to have you with us. We hear this all the time.
All the time.
Sometimes doctors just don't have time. If they have only 5 minutes to see you, 5 minutes to analyze your charts and make a recommendation, they don't really have time to go into details. And, it sounds like this was the case. The nurse probably had a little bit more time and also had a personal interest involved. And she was obviously paying attention to the HbA1c, which is an important number to pay attention to. The doctor looked like he wasn't that interested in it. So hopefully Bob's endocrinologist will give him meaningful information about whether he should continue to take metformin for insulin resistance. My own experience is that when I stopped taking metformin to prove a point, the amount of insulin that I had to make to keep my glucose in control went up. So that's just my own experience. But anyway, good luck with keeping calm and ketoing on, Bob.
Yeah. Congratulations, Bob. That's great news.
Yeah. So what have you got, Carl?
Well, I'm going to read a 5-star review that was left for us on what we used to call iTunes, and now we call Apple Podcasts.
Right.
Right. And that's what they call it anyway. But here it is. Before hearing of this podcast, I already knew about the ketogenic way of eating. I tried it for a few months previously, lost 40 pounds, and missed my pizza and lasagna, so I went back.
Mm-hmm.
Fast forward to August 2017. I was sent to the emergency room with blood sugar levels of 594.
Wow. Ouch.
Yeah. A life-threatening condition if left untreated.
Absolutely.
I didn't even know I had a problem. My A1C was 11.7.
Wow.
The doctor said, pay close attention to the nutritionist and what she has to say.
Uh-oh.
The diet they wanted me in to manage my type 2 diabetes was basically the same way I had been eating for years, just with a few lower carbs. I was ecstatic. Living with diabetes is going to be easy.
Yeah.
They wanted me to eat between 45 and 60 grams of carbs per meal.
Wow.
Woot! I can do that.
Yeah.
I did less than that per day while on keto.
Yeah.
Well, my blood sugars did not improve. Even taking the max dosage of metformin had little effect, and I felt like I was doomed.
Yeah, no kidding.
Then I decided to go keto again. What did I have to lose?
Sure.
I can go nearly carb-free. I did it before. But can I with diabetes? That might complicate things. That led me to this podcast. These guys aren't exaggerating about what happens on keto. I went 0 carb on 17 October 27, lost 40 pounds in 2 weeks. I felt great. This series of podcasts not only explains keto for the person who has never heard about it, but it also explains things in such a way that it will make doctors who have poo-pooed it reconsider what the medical establishment says. A keto diet should be the first thing attempted for someone diagnosed with type 2 diabetes, not drugs. Well, 3 weeks after starting keto, I gave up the meds. My blood sugar stayed perfectly normal without it. Keto is simply a way of life for me now. You wouldn't think about eating dirt out of your yard, would you? No. Even though it has plenty of minerals? No. No reason to eat dirt. I feel the same way about carbs now. I get everything I need on a keto diet.
Yep.
Plus, I'm burning my body fat, and I have not worried about my diabetes taking my feet or eyes or brain. The 2 keto dudes rock. If you're curious, want to know what this is all about, if you have diabetes or just want to lose a dozen or a couple 100 pounds, then sit back and enjoy. You'll be amazed at the health benefits as well as the science behind ketosis.
Wow. Thank you for the comment on iTunes or Apple Podcasts, whatever they call it this week. But that's outstanding. And you know what's interesting? Both of those stories are very, very similar. I mean,
they are.
The first guy, Bob, his HbA1c was 11.8, and he lost 40 pounds in 2 weeks. And the second guy, his HbA1c was 11.7, and, you know, he lost 40 pounds in 2 weeks as well.
2 weeks, yeah.
I mean, I didn't lose that much that quickly myself.
Right.
Overall, I lost 50 kilograms, you know, over 4 years. But in the first 3 months, I probably lost 45 of those kilograms. So, you know, it's a common story that we're seeing and hearing all over the place.
Sure is. All right. Well, this is, it's time for our interview, and our guest isn't here with us right now, but while I was here in London, I trekked out to Wales to the home of Zoe Harcombe.
Nice.
And we rang Richard up on Skype and recorded an interview with her, which we're going to do in 2 parts. That's why this is called Zoe Rocks Part 1. So we're going to play the first half of our conversation with Zoe Harcombe right now.
Heard you say you're due for a little.
Well, I am in Wales at the home of Dr. Zoe Harcombe. Hi, Zoe.
Hi, Carl. How are you doing?
I'm well. And Richard is here.
Well, I'm in Canberra, actually, Australia.
But you're with us. You're with us, Richard.
I am. Yeah. Sure am.
Yeah. And we're just going to have a little chat.
So I remember the first time I ever noticed Zoe Harcombe. She was tweeting, and I mean, lots of people in the low carb community tweet, and she was doing her submission for a PhD. And she tells this charming story about how she handed over her thesis, and the committee who were examining it handed it back to her, or the member of the committee handed it back to her and said, "Thank you, Dr. Harcombe." And that was the point she knew she'd passed.
Oh, that was a really nice day, actually. It's almost 2 years ago now.
Yeah.
So that was March the 4th, 2016. You just don't know. You just don't know how it's going to go. So, you know, I had gone up so prepared because I was warned that, you know, the Vivas are really tough. And I knew I had a lot of people in the Viva because the first paper that had come out from the PhD was really controversial in the UK. I mean, it made global headlines. It ended up being the 64th most impactful paper in the whole of 2015 across any discipline. I got so horribly attacked by stupid trolls on Twitter and all the rest of it. I just learned how to use the block and mute buttons very effectively. But, at various points, without sort of, going into people, my supervisor, I had a number of supervisors, and, let's put it this way, some were definitely more helpful than others. And I remember at one point talking to Dr. Malcolm Kendrick about this. And, he said, well, the most likely thing is that, somebody is being tapped on the shoulder saying, this is one of yours, mature student or otherwise. Obviously, I'm not, the 18-year-old student. You need to keep them in tow kind of thing, because I definitely found I got less help from particular directions after that paper had been published. But I do have to particularly credit a guy called Professor Bruce Davies, who had retired and was the guy who originally persuaded me to do the PhD. And we'd come across each other talking about obesity at various functions in Wales. And Bruce had said, you really should do a PhD. I just said, I'm way too busy. And he colluded with my husband basically to arrange it. And I then had no excuses. So, and he was my mentor throughout. So, when people say, where did you do your PhD? I would probably say in a coffee shop in Cardiff, because it was Bruce mentoring me that got me through those years of resistance as much within from outside. So when you finally get to the Viva and you've got so many people in there, because they really want to make sure this doesn't end up a controversial award or whatever, I just didn't know how it was going to go. And when the guy said, congratulations, Dr. Harcombe, I just I think I sort of burst into tears or something. Actually, I was certainly welled up. I'm welling up a little bit now, actually, just remembering it. I mean, it was just, I just couldn't believe it. I couldn't believe all that work had come to what I wanted it to come to.
Tell us about your dissertation.
So the dissertation basically asked the question, were we right to introduce the dietary fat guidelines? So the two dietary fat guidelines that we introduced were, of course, to have no more than 30% of our daily calorie intake in the form of total fat, and to have no more than 10% in the form of saturated fat. Those were the two dietary fat guidelines introduced in the US in 1977. The UK followed suit in 1983. Other countries then largely followed suit, and they have really not been changed in the last 40 or so years. So what I wanted to do was to examine the evidence base for those dietary guidelines in 4 parts, to say, was the epidemiological evidence available at the time in 1977 and 83, would it have approved the introduction of those guidelines? Better still, would the randomized controlled trial evidence have approved the introduction of those guidelines at the time? And then, with the benefit of hindsight, to bring it up to date and say, okay, if, as was found, there was no evidence at the time, either RCT or epidemiological, being as reasonable as we can be, let's look at the evidence that's now available or was available in 2015, 2016. Would it now substantiate those two dietary guidelines if they were being introduced today? And the evidence again said no. So those 4 parts, then and now, RCTs and epidemiology. And what I also used, which made it even more novel and unique, was the modern method of systematic review and meta-analysis, which was just about available to the committee. The first use of that term comes around about 1976, but you can largely say the American and the UK committees would not have been familiar with the concept of systematic review and meta-analysis, but we are today. So we can pool all the studies that were available at the time, but they didn't even reference most of the studies that were available at the time. They referenced the 7-country study and not 5 other epidemiological peer-reviewed studies that came to completely different conclusions. They may have referenced the mental health study in Finland, which was not randomized, not controlled, and yet they didn't reference the randomized control trials that were available. So they were so selective with their so-called review of the evidence and seemingly picked off what they wanted to conclude rather than what all the evidence considered objectively would have concluded. And of course, the consequences have been catastrophic.
Didn't Ansel Keys actually come out and suggest that maybe he was wrong about his hypothesis, and by then the ship had already sailed?
I do think that in our field, Ansel Keys is quite often unfairly treated. Now, we need to remember that he was a brilliant scientist. He did some things wrong, but he started out doing things right. So, he was the man who gave us the Minnesota starvation experiment from 1945, which is probably still the most definitive experiment that we've got on low-calorie, calorie-deficit dieting and its catastrophic consequences, and what happens when people stop a low-calorie diet and how they tend to regain the weight and more. That was a brilliant study. You can't take that away from the guy. The 7-country study was also a brilliant study. And to be fair to the guy, he went into the 7-country study thinking that total fat was associated with heart disease, because people confuse the 6 countries graph. I've got this clarified on my blog if anyone wants to go to zoeharcombe.com and see the clarity. The 6 countries graph that came from a presentation that he did in 1953 at the Mount Sinai Hospital, where he famously put up data for 6 countries that showed a strong relationship between heart disease in middle-aged men and the total fat intake in the diets of those middle-aged men. And then, of course, he was highly criticised. Hillebo and Yerushalmi came out in 1957 and said, well, actually, there were data available for 22 countries that you didn't include, and if you had have included all of that, it would look a little bit different. Not entirely different, but it would certainly not give rise to that conclusion. That's the one naughty thing that I think he did. And scientifically, that was lacking in integrity, and it let him down. It did him no credit, because he was better than that. So he went into the 7-country study thinking that total fat caused heart disease, or was at least associated with. And to be fair to him again, he concluded at the end of the 7-country study, and this is not widely known, that total fat was absolutely not even associated with coronary heart disease or deaths from coronary heart disease. What he did think then was that saturated fat was associated with deaths from coronary heart disease. But again, when you look at that one study, in among the peer studies in Honolulu, and of course the Framingham study and the London Bus and Bankmen study, none of them found any association with saturated fat and heart disease. And yet this one study that did find this association, it found far more interesting associations, let me tell you, but the fact that it even found an association with saturated fat, despite it bucking the trend of all the other studies at the time, we seem to put inordinate weight on this one study quite unfairly in amongst its peers. That wasn't entirely Ansel Keys' fault. And yes, he probably did try to backpedal a little bit, because I do believe at heart he was a genuine scientist. I think he just did one bad thing in 1953 and he probably regretted it.
I think they did a study, or he did a study, the Minnesota coronary experiment, to try and prove his hypothesis. And it falsified his hypothesis, and whether he was involved or not, that was the information from that was certainly hidden for many, many years. I think Nina Teicholz says something like 18 years before the paper was actually published in a small, little-known journal or something.
You make a very good point, and you've just reminded me he might have done 2 bad things. And there may even be more bad things, because you are quite right.
He was a naughty man.
I'm just trying to be academically fair here, but yeah, that's 2 bad things now. That kind of sets a trend. So the Minnesota coronary study, where they gave these men, basically this terrible diet, very low in saturated fat and pretty high in, fake alternatives. And they really didn't do very well. It didn't quite prove that the, fake alternatives were going to kill you, but it certainly didn't say that they were going to help in any way. And then you are very right. It was published way later than it should have been. And it was published in a journal that, was nowhere near as esteemed as the usual publications that, he could walk into Circulation or, the Lancet or the BMJ. I mean, he could publish anywhere he wants. So why did he publish it in, I forget what it was, it's sort of, the Minnesota Journal of Cardiology or something. Nina was absolutely right on that one, too late, too obscure, not really being fair. And I think she'd interviewed someone in the Big Fat Surprise and asked, why did this happen? Right. And the comment she got back was, well, it didn't quite say, what we hoped it would say.
Yeah, right.
That's bad science. That's naughty. So, okay, we got 2 now. Are we going to get a third somewhere that he did that was really bad?
We just weren't happy with the results.
Okay, here's the third bad thing. So he moved to the Mediterranean. He did live to over 100, let's credit him with that. But he moved to the Mediterranean. And then, of course, he was this massive proponent of this fictitious Mediterranean diet that is absolutely not what people in the Mediterranean actually eat. And, he didn't sort of go to great lengths to point out, actually, the reason I'm living in the Mediterranean is because I've observed people live very long in the Mediterranean. And that might not be because of what they eat. It might be because it's just the most glorious place on earth. The pace of life is, sedentary, but the activity is actually quite high because they were still working in the fields at that point. They still walk to work in the morning, wherever that work may be. They cycle around villages. The sun shines virtually every day of the year.
Vitamin D. Yeah.
Lots of wine.
Absolutely vitamin D. I go to the Mediterranean, if I can, once a year for a summer holiday. And I am so happy in those 7 days. It's ridiculous. Waking up every morning and you see the sea sparkling and the sky is just as blue can be. And they don't eat what dietitians tell you they eat in the Med. The basic principle of the Mediterranean diet is if it moves, eat it. They eat red meat more than white meat. They eat masses of dairy.
But put some garlic on it first.
Yeah, they love garlic, they love onions, they love tomatoes, they love fish, they love vegetables, they love stuff in season, and a lot of stuff is in season a lot of the year. They love fruit. They have cream-based desserts rather than wheat-based desserts. Sure, they have some white things. They do not eat whole grains. They eat white bread, white pasta, white rice. And if they eat a lot of it, they end up really, really fat, like the Italian women in mafia movies. And if they don't eat a lot of it, they end up really, really slim, like Sophia Loren from her 80s. Yeah. So it takes your choice. You eat the animal foods without the white stuff, and you stay slim and live long and gorgeous. Or you eat the animal foods with the white stuff, and you probably will get a bit porky.
So speaking of white stuff, a family member now famously sent me an email with a quote from a Harvard scientist or professor who said something along the lines of there's no definitive evidence that sugar causes type 2 diabetes. And I wonder, do we need definitive evidence when we know the biological mechanisms by which carbohydrates and sugar in particular turn into high blood glucose levels, which leads to insulin resistance, and insulin resistance over time, given enough time to develop, will lead to type 2 diabetes. If you know those mechanisms, do we really need to make a bunch of people diabetic in an RCT to get that quote unquote definitive evidence?
The short answer is no. We know that diabetes type 2 is essentially a disease of carbohydrate metabolism, the inability to metabolize carbohydrate. The ultimate empty carbohydrate is sucrose, sugar. So it surely should be the first one that we give up. People then should consider giving up more of the carbohydrate range, because other simple sugars are really not going to help either. Whether that's glucose, fructose, galactose, or, combinations thereof, sucrose, which of course is 50-50 glucose and fructose. One of the things I get most attacked for on Twitter is, when I dare to point out that fruit is essentially sugar. And fruit is varying combinations of fructose and glucose. Sucrose just happens to be the perfect 50-50. Some fruit will be higher in fructose than glucose, and some fruit will be higher in glucose than fructose. But it's still not far away from the 50-50. And to the body, the sugar coming from fruit or the sugar coming from the sugar bowl is essentially the same thing. And the body has to try and handle it in the same way. And I think type 2 diabetes, to me, is the body basically saying, you're giving me too much carbohydrate too often, and I just can't take it anymore. I've got this finely tuned, brilliant mechanism called the pancreas which will put sugar into the bloodstream when you need it, and it will take sugar out of the bloodstream when you need me to do that, because your blood sugar level should be meticulously controlled. But you, dear human host, are just chucking in carbs for breakfast, and then you have a muffin, and then you have an apple, and then you have a sandwich, and then you have a bag of crisps, and then you have something in the afternoon, and then you have pasta for dinner, and then you go on some crazy carb binge in the evening, and you do that day in, day out. And you're expecting me, this brilliant mechanism, to handle all of that on a regular basis. Guys, enough's enough. Type 2 diabetes to me is the body saying enough's enough. No more carbohydrate.
I think possibly the type 2 diabetic diet that's recommended may be the low-hanging fruit in this area, because I know when I was diagnosed with diabetes, I switched from a standard Australian diet, similar to a standard American diet, to the diet that I was told to eat, and I only got worse. And when I went back after learning about keto, and I went back and analysed the diet, they were feeding me 300 plus grams of glucose per day for somebody for whom the only differential diagnosis that they had was that I was unable to process glucose safely.
It is criminal, isn't it? I mean, this is why I love the work of Dr. David Unwin so much. He's a doctor in the UK who has been treating his diabetic patients, type 2 particularly, with a change in diet. And to his absolute credit, he discovered this new way of eating with the patient walking into him, and he did a double take as this woman walked in and said, "Oh my goodness, what have you done? Last time I saw you, you were way heavier. You look fantastic. Your glucose is fantastic. What have you done?" And she said, "Doc, you're not going to be happy. When I tell you what I've done, you're going to give me a row." And he said, "Go on, try me." So she said, "I have pretty much slashed my carbohydrate intake. I don't have fruit and toast for breakfast. I don't have orange juice. I'm having bacon and eggs." And, and he went away and he researched it, and he said, "You know what? There might be something in this." And he now says to patients, I was speaking at a conference with him in Switzerland last November, and he said this really powerful thing to a member of the audience who was wondering, could we do this as doctors? Was it, it was a conference of doctors and chief medical officers from around the world. And they were questioning whether people would choose to do it, whether they would stick to it, whether it's sustainable. And David said, since discovering this, every patient who I've diagnosed with prediabetes or type 2 diabetes, I have said there are a couple of ways we can now go. We can go down the lifelong medication route, and you'll probably need more meds over time, and we'll see how that goes. Or there is a very promising new pathway, which is looking at diet. And I give you a diet sheet, you stick to the diet sheet, we probably won't need meds, you will probably lose weight, you will probably feel less hungry, and you will probably feel better.
And your diabetes will probably go away.
And your diabetes will probably go into remission. Which do you want to choose? And he said, to this date, not one single person has said, "Oh, doc, just give me the meds.
Yeah.
I want the crisps and the chocolate and the cakes, just give me the meds." People don't want to take meds on a daily basis. And the smart people also realize that you will develop a tolerance to meds, and then it's a slippery slope from meds to insulin to amputations and to premature death. And there's enough in the media about that now that people are wisening up to it.
And you could have had bacon and eggs every day.
Exactly. It's not such a hardship.
It's not hard.
Yeah. And then you won't be hungry until lunchtime, or maybe even dinner time. You may find yourself skipping a meal just because you didn't need a meal. Some crazy things are going to start happening. And that's the work that he's done. And he's published some great papers with really simple diet sheets showing the results that he's had in his tens. It's now heading into over 100 patients that he and his wife Jen have personally treated in their own little practice in England. It's fantastic.
And he's sharing this information with other practitioners now, isn't he?
He is indeed.
So that's the important thing.
Yep, he is. He speaks regularly at conferences. As I say, his papers are openly available, and his papers alone could be read by another doctor, and the doctor would immediately know what they could do with their patients.
Wonderful.
He's been on TV in the UK a couple of times. He's a fabulous guy. He's got the most lovely bedside manner. And, one person at a time, he's changing lives over here.
And I think of people like Dr. Westman, who has treated some 4,000 patients in the last 10 years with a complete success rate, more or less, just by, telling them to eat bacon and eggs and take the carbohydrates out of your diet and all the diabetes goes into remission. I mean, of all the people that I've talked to, I think he's got the most patience.
Who was that? Sorry,
Dr. Eric Westman.
Oh yes, of course.
He's been doing it the longest.
Yeah. Well, Eric, of course, rewrote the sort of coming again of the Atkins book. So Atkins revisited or Revolution, whatever it was, and of course it was then Dr. Eric Westman and his book and his writing that was the thing that first came to the attention of Professor Tim Noakes. And Professor Tim Noakes, picked up that Atkins revolution when he himself was struggling with energy, with increasing weight around his middle, despite the fact that he was doing extreme exercise, marathons, ultra marathons and the rest of it. And he read the book and he got to the end and he just said, on the one level, this is the craziest thing I've ever read. And on the other level, this is the most sensible thing I have ever read. Yeah. And of course, as a A1 rated scientist, brilliant academic that he is, he went away to investigate and he's never looked back.
Yeah.
And that brings us to the next part of your story, which is your first South African adventure, which is as a freshly minted PhD, you went to the conference in Cape Town, right?
Yeah, I wasn't actually a PhD then, actually. The first paper, the first paper had just been published. So that was February 2015, literally the week before we went out to South Africa. The timing wasn't engineered, but it almost couldn't have been better. So I turned up in South Africa with my heroes. Gary Tobes was there, Professor Tim Noakes was there, Eric was there, Jay Wortman, Stephen Finney. I didn't know Jason at the time. Jason has since become one of my heroes. But I remember turning up thinking, crikey, how am I okay to be among this esteemed group of people? I was truly humbled. Yeah. And then thanks, I guess, to that paper, as I sort of turned up, hi, I'm Zoe. Everyone was like, oh, great paper, loved your paper. It almost sort of made me feel, okay, I'm all right being here. I'm not a doctor yet, but, I'm on the right path, hopefully. So I really enjoyed that conference. You
were on the dream team of Tim Noakes' trial.
Yeah, and I would have been completely unknown to Tim at the time of turning up at the Cape Town conference because, of course, it was Karen Thompson who organised it. Because unbeknown to us at the time, something had been happening in the background. So there was this crazy tweet exchange back in February 2014, and then various other things happened over 2014, but it wasn't until early 2015 that the prof was told that he was going to be charged with medical misconduct or whatever nonsense they were going to charge him with. Right. So during all of this hanging over him, even before knowing he was going to be charged, Karen had said, look, this is my grandfather's best friend. I'm going to show him that he's not alone. I've seen these people on Twitter. There are loads of people out there saying the same thing. He's not alone. Let's get a conference together. And it was entirely Karen who pulled all of that together.
Wow.
So Tim had no idea who I was.
She was the granddaughter of Christian Bernard. Is that correct?
Yep, absolutely. Granddaughter of Christian Bernard, of course, the person who first performed the heart transplant, had been an academic and then sort of medical research peer of Tim's. So, the two of them had come to know each other for a long time. And, I think Tim would view Karen as just like one of his own granddaughters. They have a wonderful relationship. So Karen had sort of arranged all of this. Tim had no idea who I was. But I knew that some of the things that I was putting up, I like to go to the heart of nutrition. So, when I was sort of saying things like, all foods that contain fat contain all three fats. Not many people seem to know that. Dietitians, public health advisors seem to think that there are foods that exist that only contain unsaturated fats and that you can completely avoid saturated fat without dying. It just shows their complete and utter ignorance.
Zoe, there is actually one exception to that. Acetic acid is a saturated fat, and it's only a saturated fat. But it's not a lipid. It's a water-soluble saturated
vinegar?
fat.
Yeah, you wouldn't call that a food, though, would you? I mean, I'm sure you can come up with all kinds of stuff in the lab. You can isolate all of the fats. But when it comes to food, when it comes to things we actually put in our mouth, I'd love
That's
these
true.
dietitians to tell us, what is it we're supposed to be eating?
Right.
And, I was chucking out things in my presentation, and Tim was in the front row, and he's a really tall guy. And I could just see him nodding all the way through, and it was so encouraging. He's such a great active listener. So I'm chucking out things like, olive oil has got 7 times the total fat of a, sirloin steak or whatever. I mean, I was just throwing out these things on saturated fat and total fat. And you could just see, oily fish has got more total fat and more saturated fat than red meat, but they tell us to eat one and not the other. And he just seemed to love these. And a number of them actually then appeared in Raising Superheroes, which was his follow-up book. In fact, one of my tables from one of my presentations in South Africa actually appeared in the Raising Superheroes. So I was thrilled to bits. And then I guess Tim became aware that every week I blog and I take apart the latest nonsense that's come out from Harvard, or the latest really good stuff that's come out from, the BMJ or BJSM or Lancet. And he kind of got to know me then. And then he approached me in, crikey, when was it? Summer of 2016, to say it has come to our attention that a particular paper written by people at all of my universities that don't like me, that are out to get me, Stellenbosch, Cape Town, they've collaborated to write this study on, they claim they've done a meta-analysis of low-fat versus low-carb diets, and that basically, there's no evidence for the low-carb diet, and they're using that effectively to put me on trial. Incredible. He said, I know that you like dissecting stuff like this. Can you take a look at this paper and let me know if there's anything wrong with it? And it was so exciting, the carrot of, is there something wrong with this? And I remember getting back to him within a couple of days to say, Tim, it's not, is there something wrong with it? It's, can I find anything right with it? And he's like, oh, so write something, get back to me as fast as you can. So I literally worked as fast as I could, and I sent back to him, and it's like, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong, this is wrong. He's like, we've got to do a paper. So we then did a paper. We got it submitted to the South African Medical Journal. He then, of course, says, you've got to come and be one of my expert witnesses at my trial, because this is going to be on a major ticket item on the trial, and you can do all of your PhD stuff as well. But, we want to put this Nordea trial back on trial. So I then rearranged my holiday and said, okay, we're going to come to Cape Town instead, and, have 2 weeks being at this unbelievable experience of the trial. And we knew at that point that the paper was going to be published in the SAMJ shortly after the trial. So we knew we could put it on the public record and talk about it. And it was so funny because one of the authors on the paper was actually in the courtroom during the trial.
Wow.
And during these trials, it just shows you how lazy the opposition were, because we were so prepared on the defense team. And all papers that are going to be used in the trial by both sides have to go to the other side about a week before the trial even starts. So you all know what is going to come up. There's no surprises.
Yeah. It's called Discovery, I think, isn't it?
Exactly, Discovery. So we read every single word of what they were going to present, and they still chucked in some stuff, that they hadn't declared, and we let it pass most of the time. But they had all of this stuff before Tim went on the stand, before I went on the stand, and they clearly hadn't read any of it. Really? And at the point I started talking about this trial, you could just see them running around like startled rabbits in the courtroom, like, how did we not know about this? We know, Madam Chair, we need a halt to proceedings. This is new. And, Adam Pikester, Tim's fabulous lawyer, was jumping up going, it's not new. See page 2,900 or whatever. It was just so funny. I mean, it was like being in an episode of LA Law. I was going to say,
that would make a hell of a movie, wouldn't it? Who did you have to convince? Was there a jury? Was it just the judge? Was there, and what were their credentials? Were they qualified to hear and make a judgment?
Well, that was the funniest thing. So they had the first hearing, if I'm remembering all of this off the top of my head right, I think the first hearing was July 2015, and they had to abort it because they couldn't even follow their own rules. So let's remember who you're up against at the moment. So HPCSAA is the Health Professions Council of South Africa, and they're effectively the body that represents health professionals, whether they're dietitians, doctors, surgeons, whatever. Health professionals in South Africa are represented by this body. And so they have their own set of rules, their own protocol that says if somebody's suspected of bringing their profession, their particular profession, into disrepute, then the HPCSA can decide to charge that professional in effect on behalf of all other professionals. And these are the circumstances in, which the person can be charged. And, they couldn't even follow their own rules because it said the person on trial has to be charged by or has to be overviewed by a panel of their peers, at least one of whom has to be in the same discipline, and they all have to be proper peers. Well, of course, they stacked the first panel with dietitians because the complainant was a dietitian.
Right.
And dietitians are the ones, let's face it, who are really miffed with Professor Tim Noakes because he's making them look like fools.
Right.
Because he's getting great results. He's super slim and healthy looking himself.
Right.
And he's getting good results with all of his patients. And he's not following their high carb, low fat dietary advice. So they don't like him. Let's make no mistake. They really don't like him. And it looks like this whole trial was a setup, which shouldn't come to a surprise of anyone. So there's a chair who is one of a member of a panel of 6 people. So you could have a split panel, but the chair would then have the casting vote. As it happened, 5 people found the prof completely exonerated on all 10 counts that they were asked to consider. And the other guy, none of us could quite fathom how he had come to the conclusions that he did, because it was actually not possible to even conclude that there was a doctor-patient relationship between the prof and this random unknown woman on Twitter. When, he hadn't agreed that she was his patient and she hadn't agreed that he was his doctor. So they failed their own standard of what constitutes a doctor. But this poor chap obviously didn't quite work out the nuances of the trial. And he was the one who said, I think he's guilty. But at the end of it, it came to nothing. But of course, they are appealing because, they won't let it go.
But they still haven't told you why they're appealing.
No,
right?
they haven't. No. So the final verdict was delivered on the 21st of April 2017. They were allowed, the HPCSA then had 21 days to appeal. They came in on day 21 and said, we are going to appeal, but they didn't say why they're going to appeal. And to this day, we still don't know why they're appealing, but we understand that at some point they still plan to hold an appeal. But remember, that verdict was never supposed to happen because they are the judge, they are the jury, they appoint the judge, they appoint the panel. They are never supposed to fail in any prosecution that they choose to bring because all the odds are in their favour. This just wasn't supposed to happen.
But they presupposed the verdict, didn't they?
Yeah.
So it wasn't televised, the whole thing, but Marika Sabouros is just a master wizard at putting in 140 characters.
I know.
Every nuance that was happening in the room. And so all across the world, we are watching Marika's Twitter feed to follow this. And at one point, they claimed that Prof was guilty before even the summation arguments had happened.
I'll try and remember my dates now. I mean, I should be able to remember them accurately. Okay, so the trial finished it was definitely a Wednesday, about 5 p.m., and I think it was the 26th of October, 2017, and I was with the prof and his delightful wife, Marilyn, on Friday of that week, which should have been the 28th of October, and
2016, I think.
2016, yes, thank you. Yes, so crikey, lost a year then. Yeah, of course, the verdict was 2017. So on Friday, the 28th of October, 2016, we were with the prof having a lovely lunch in Stellenbosch, and Adam Pikester, his lawyer, phoned up and said, "You're not going to believe this, Tim. I'm sending you something by email. Open it up, read it." And Tim sort of read it out loud to us, and he's just like, "They found me guilty." And at the end of the session on Wednesday, the judge had said, right, we're going to meet as a panel the first week in April 2017. We will then deliberate on these dates and we will then deliver the verdict. We will. She committed to it on the 21st of April 2017. That's what's going to happen. And yet the HPCSA, no, we won't bother with deliberations next year. Let's just announce him guilty now, which of course spectacularly backfired because, as you say, Marika spotted it, alerted Adam. Marika and then Adam then alerted Chair Joan Adams, who was apoplectic because...
Oh, she would be.
Yeah, it completely undermined her authority and her integrity. And it was withdrawn within about 2 hours. But not before. I was with the prof and Jake White, the legendary coach, was sort of, phoning up and texting saying, "Oh, Prof, I'm really sorry to hear this." And, Tim was going back, "Jake, don't worry, mate. Don't worry. Thanks for the call, buddy. But don't worry." I mean, the number of people that Tim must have in his address book, that would be a good mobile to steal, I tell you.
Sure.
He knows the who's who of the elite sporting world, and they were all saying, "Tim, we love you. What's going on?" So that was quite funny.
So a lot of our listeners, and I had this experience as well, have had doctors who are afraid of losing their license and therefore won't recommend lower carb diets and high fat diets especially. And my doctor looked right at me and said, I can't recommend this diet because if there's one ancillary heart attack, I could lose my license, which is complete BS, first of all. But second, it just shows you the fear that these doctors have. And then I look at doctors like, Dr. Westman, Ted Naiman, and Jeff Gerber, and all these guys who are just out there doing it and reversing their patients' diabetes and not having problems. And I wonder, have any doctors approached you about, hey, if I get sued, will you come, represent me in court or be a witness at my trial?
They haven't asked that, but I have been approached by a lot of doctors who say, "I've come across what you're doing. I follow you on Twitter. I read your blog. I read your book," and say, how can we get this out there? How they're determined to help their patients.
Right.
So how can we do more to get this out there? They want to be the next David Unwin, the next Eric Westman, the next bold doctor. But isn't it just criminal that when there is no evidence for the current dietary guidelines, there just is no evidence for those guidelines, and yet there is simultaneously this system that says, okay, but if you follow those guidelines, you won't get sued if something untoward happens. Gary Taube said this in Good Calories, Bad Calories. He said, you just can't advise anything other than a low-fat diet, because to do so would just be to risk your profession, your medical license, to end up in exactly the same kind of place as Tim. And who on earth would want to go through that for 4 years? Right. And yet we know when we see the results that we can help people so much more by ignoring what is supposed to be good advice. It's just crazy.
And his trial sets a precedent, doesn't it? That if somebody sues you, you're not going to go to jail. You're not going to lose your license. I mean, the evidence is on your side, isn't it?
I'm still curious to see what the end outcome will be in this whole trial because of the South African system, because of the HPCSA holding all the cards. It would not surprise me if at some point they find some way of taking away the prof's license, despite the fact he doesn't even practice and hasn't practiced for many years. I still think that this is so important to dietitians and people dishing out the conventional advice that they will do whatever it takes to find a way to be seen, to justify their own advice. They just won't let it go. It's obsessive. Get over it, guys. Ship has sailed. Move on,
Have a steak.
Yeah. I think part of the answer to this, because we really have a diabetes epidemic that's coming crashing on our shores right now. It's a tsunami. And I think part of the answer to this is not to attack this from the top down, but from the bottom up, and really do what Tim's doing with his Banting book, helping people change their own lives and then turn around and change the lives of their loved ones. And eventually the dietitians are just going to run out of clients.
Wouldn't that be lovely? I mean, I do think, the reputation of dietitians is being seriously harmed worldwide. And, every now and again, you might see something saying, "Oh, we've been advising low carb diets, for like 5 minutes or whatever." And then and then you go and look at the sort of the paper they're referring to, and it might be, you might be able to go as low as 45% carbohydrate. It's like, guys, when you actually publish a paper that said, for the best thing you could do for type 2 diabetes, if not type 1 as well, is to get your carb intake as low as you personally can stick to and enjoy. And, eating is holistic. It's about sociability. It's about enjoyment. If 75 grams works for you, great. If 25 grams works for you, maybe even better. But, the day they come out with something at that kind of level, okay, is the day I might say, finally, you've turned the tide. But don't, whatever you do, try and claim you got there first, because I will just fall over myself laughing.
Right.
Excuse me.
Well, Zoe, we're running out of time for this episode, but we want to continue talking. So we'll just extend this to the next episode of Two Keto Dudes. So thank you for sharing with us.
Oh, pleasure. Look forward to the next one.
Okay.
Heard you say you're due for a little.
Wow, that was just great.
Zoe is such a rock star, isn't she?
I didn't get what Zoe does until I talked to her. That she just loves picking apart science and picking apart studies and the news that comes out and helping us make sense of it. That's what she does.
Yeah, that is. And she's very good at it.
Yeah, very good at it. Well, are you hungry?
I'm hungry. I think it's time for some
recipes!
Probably some tapas recipes, because it's January and this year we're doing appetizers, and the whole of January we're doing Spanish tapas.
And what's great about tapas and small plates in general, which we're doing all year, is that small plates are very suited to keto because we typically don't eat as much as we used to.
Right, yeah.
And so making lots of little small plates sometimes allows you to manage how much you eat a lot easier.
It's certainly great for judging satiety because, if you have 5 little small plates and you have a bite out of one plate and then you move to the next one and maybe you start to get satiated already, you can put all the plates back in the fridge and bring them out as soon as you get hungry again. So, it works really well.
Exactly. All right, so I'll go first.
So what do you got?
I've got keto tapas meatballs.
Nice.
So oven-baked, braised meatballs are a staple of tapas. Typically, you want to make them in an earthenware pot with some sort of sauce that's a little bit fragrant, and then you take them out and you serve them one at a time, usually in a little ramekin or on a big spoon. Those Chinese spoons are perfect for serving tapas, like
the porcelain ones.
Porcelain ones, But I use little ramekins, and that's just fun. So for the meatballs, you're going to use 750 grams of minced beef, veal, and pork mix. So that's your basic meatball mix, equal parts ground beef, veal, and pork. You can use just beef and pork. You can use just beef. It doesn't matter. You're making meatballs. Crushed garlic, 3 cloves worth. A medium egg. 3 ounces of crushed pork rinds. That gives it that binding.
Yeah.
And the thing that, for me, softens meatballs is oil. So I'm adding 2 tablespoons of extra virgin olive oil to the mix, and then about a half a teaspoon of salt. And you may or may not want more salt, but, for us, salt is good. And I've never complained that food was too salty since I went keto. Isn't that neat?
Well, one interesting thing I've noticed about beef mince and pork mince and veal mince is the massive variation in fat content. And so, here in Australia, the fat in minced beef goes from 2% fat to 17% fat. So if you can only get the lean versions, then you might have to add a little bit of extra virgin oil.
Okay, so we're going to make a sauce. So you need, for that, 1/4 cup of extra virgin olive oil.
Right.
A small onion or a half an onion chopped finely. You don't want too many onions. 2 tablespoons of dried chili peppers, and I like to use ancho chilies.
Okay. And
you can get those at any Spanish or Mexican store. They're dried ancho chilies. They're not really spicy a lot. They have a little bit of heat, but they've got a lot of flavor.
Nice.
So you want to chop those up nicely. A tablespoon of cumin or cumin seed. If you want to toast the cumin seed, that also works really well.
Yeah.
Bring out the oils. 250 milliliters of low-carb tomato sauce. Now, that could be Rao's or homemade sauce, or if you want to use tomato paste, that generally has less carbs per tablespoon, and it's thicker, too, so you don't need as much of it.
Sure.
A large sprig of tarragon, and this is a trick that I learned from Daddy Jack, who uses tarragon in his spaghetti, pizza sauce, whatever, his tomato sauce. And, oh my God, it makes such a big difference. And, of course, it works great with tapas.
Yeah. So tarragon's got that aniseed sort of flavor to it, doesn't it?
Yeah, right. 1/4 cup of dry red wine. And if you really want the Spanish experience, get some Rioja.
Yeah, yep.
Salt and pepper to taste. So You want to preheat the oven to about 300 Fahrenheit, and that's about what? Celsius?
Yeah, that's about 150 Celsius.
Awesome. And you want to combine all the meatball ingredients and just mix them up thoroughly. Shape them into balls. No big whoop. So you chop the onion and peppers into very small bits, and when you're chopping the dried peppers, you want to probably take out the seeds.
Okay.
And it's going to be crispy and dry, so just you want to separate that well on your cutting board.
Sure.
Yep. So you're going to fry that in olive oil over medium heat until the onions are translucent and the peppers are soft.
Sure.
It's, maybe 5 or 6 minutes. You want to add the cumin and chopped tarragon and stir to combine those for a little bit. Now you want to add the wine and allow that to burn off a little while stirring for another 2 minutes. And probably you might want to turn the heat up to just sort of evaporate some of that wine a bit. But it only takes about 2 minutes, and you can bring it back down to medium heat. Add your tomato, whatever it is, puree, paste. Thoroughly combine that. And, while you're doing it, you're going to know, like, how much is enough, how much is too much. You can just add a little bit, taste it, add a little bit, taste it. It can be overwhelming, so, just be careful. Check it out. Try it. And then, of course, you want to salt and pepper that according to taste. So then in your earthenware pot, put about half the sauce in the bottom and layer in the meatballs. And then you cover the meatballs with the remaining sauce. Put the cover on, bake that for about 30 minutes. You want to open the pot and rotate the meatballs, maybe cook for another 10, 15 minutes. And then you serve them hot, as I said. In a ramekin, you put a little sauce in the bottom, put the meatball on there, and there you go. Just serve it with a fork.
Nice.
Delicious.
Yeah. I actually had some of those tonight, believe it or not. So
you did?
Yeah, I did. And they were delicious. Absolutely.
And was your recipe pretty close to mine?
Almost identical. What I didn't do was I didn't have onions, but I certainly had peppers and garlic. And I think I had a little bit less mince, and I made 16 meatballs. So, I'm going to be eating that for a while. So it's awesome.
Nice.
Yeah. I love Spanish tapas meatballs. Absolutely delicious. Good recipe.
Thank you.
So I've got a couple of recipes, but I'm going to give you one this week, but I'm going to tease one of the recipes that is going to be coming up, and that is churros with chocolate sauce. Churros, which I had for dinner tonight. And if you go to Ketogenic Forums to What Did I Eat Today, you'll actually see a post of my churros in there. But so the recipe is upcoming. It's sort of like a tease to get you to listen to the next version of the podcast. But today we're going to do a very simple one. And this one is basically ham, cheese, and olives. And on a stick. Beautiful. So what I do is I get some manchego, which is a sheep's milk cheese. It's quite hard, and so I start off with a wedge of the cheese, and I use a mandolin to do a very thin slice. So it's a very thin triangular slice with a little bit of the rind at one end. You can eat the rind of the manchego cheese. It's actually quite tasty. So I start with a very thin slice. It ends up being about 6 grams of cheese. And then around that slice, I'm going to get some jamón ibérico, which is Spanish ham.
Now, we got to say something about jamón ibérico, right?
Yeah.
It used to be illegal in the United States up until about 5 or 6 years ago. You couldn't import it.
Wow.
And I first had it in Barcelona.
Yeah.
And it was so good. I had never had a better ham. Think of like the best Serrano or prosciutto you've ever had that just has this really rich, nutty, velvety texture and flavor. Yeah. And it's from the acorns. They feed
from
these
the acorns,
pigs
that's right. Yeah, I know.
Yeah.
And it really is delicious. We can get it in Australia. But as you say, it's like the Spanish version of prosciutto with that sort of nutty, hazelnutty flavor.
And it's also very expensive.
Yeah, that too.
$80 a pound at Fromage in Old Saybrook. And,
Yeah, so it's not cheap, so we're going to use shaved slices of this. So it's very, very fine slice, and what you want to do is you want to wrap it around your wedge of manchego cheese, and then you drop an olive, a feta stuffed olive on the top of that, and stick a toothpick through it, and that's your that's the easiest tapas that you will ever do. And it is absolutely, it's a great combination. It's really delicious. Even if you're not a fan of olives, that particular combination works really well. So that's my tapas for today.
Yeah. Wow, that's delicious. Well, we're going to have a tapas party now.
We might do some tapas at Keto Fest. Maybe we might cook up some.
Yeah, we might.
Because last year at Keto Fest, I did like 6 meals for 40 people in 30 minutes. Maybe I might try for like 10 tapas meals.
That's a good idea.
In 30 minutes. Yeah. Wow. I think that is what I'll try and do.
Well, that's our show. Make sure you come back next week to hear part 2 of Zoe Rocks.
Of course, if you have anything that you want to tell us, something we said wrong, something you don't agree with, some more research that you found to support or refute anything that we've said, send it by email to dudes@2ketodudes.com or post it on our website.
And you can follow us on Twitter at 2ketodudes, on Instagram at 2ketodudes, and make sure to use the hashtag 2ketodudes.
And of course, if you want to join the free ketogenic forum, it's forum.2keto.com.
And if useless swag is your fancy, T-shirts, coffee mugs, and other junk with our mugs on them, head over to gear.2keto.com.
And if you want a shot at getting some of that swag for free, join the 2 Keto Dudes fan club. You'll be eligible to win something in every show. Go to fanclub.2keto.com.
And if you feel like supporting our podcasts and our forums, think about making a pledge on our Patreon page at patreon.2keto.com.
Or just hit the donate button on our website at www.2ketodudes.com. Or just go to donate.2keto.com.
You can also see all of our podcasts and other videos on YouTube at youtube.2keto.com.
And if you haven't already, go leave us a review on iTunes. That's how new people get to know about what we do.
2 Keto Dudes is brought to you by 2 Keto LLC, who strives to support the low-carb community with podcasts and other publications. Well, my friend, keep calm and keto on.
Keep calm and keto on, Carl.
All right. And we'll see you next time
on 2 Keto Dudes.